Okay, good morning. Today's Wednesday. It is the 5th day of Adar. And we begin a new chapter, chapter 31 in the Tanya. And Alter Rebbe now is going to help us out and how everything is said in this past two chapters should not cause any negative effects. What do I mean? So, in chapter 26, Alter Rebbe explained how it is necessary, it is important to serve Hashem with simcha, to serve God with joy, because that's the only way you're going to win. You got to be joyous, you got to be happy, otherwise, you're going to fall down. Now, then, he said, he gives us advice how to not to fall into sadness. And if you go back to those chapters, you'll see he gives us advice in any type of situation, how to still be happy. But then in chapter 29 and chapter 30, Alter Rebbe discusses a different problem. And that is the problem of timtum alev, that sometimes a person feels numb, spiritually numb, and he cannot break out of this numbness. And the advice he gave in these last two chapters is to be very critical of yourself. And when we're talking about critical of yourself, critical of your nefesh haba'amis, of your animal soul, and to crush it down. The problem is, however, if you're being so critical of yourself, as we learned yesterday, compare yourself to others, you'll see how lower than anybody else, even the lowest of the low, you are still lower than them. This can lead a person into sadness. So we're going back to the same original problem. If you feel yourself if you think so low of yourself, that's going to lead you to sadness. So here in this chapter, says the Alter Rebbe, don't worry about it. And he goes and explains in detail what is the difference between sadness and bitterness. Tiny bit of sadness in the right time will help you break out of the numbness. And he says, because it is necessary to have it from time to time, this breaking yourself. Because in order to fight the evil inclination, you have to use something sort of like fighting fire with fire, something of their own sort. And that's why you do need that. However, it gives us advice and it tells us how this will not interfere into his service of Hashem, serving Hashem with simcha, with happiness. So let's look inside. Says the Alter Rebbe, "V'hinei af im kesheyarich harbe." Now, although by dwelling long, lehamik beinyonim anizkorim le'el, to dwelling long to think deeply into the things that were mentioned earlier, keshor, shtayim, an hour or two, liyo is b'nemichas ruach v'leiv nishbar. To be a lowly spirit and contrite of heart, this may lead him into profound sadness or depression. Says the Alter Rebbe, lo yachash. Let him not be afraid of this. And although, says the Alter Rebbe, although we know that the sadness, depression, is something that comes from the klipas noiga. It is from the other side, not the side of the holiness. As we learned in the earlier chapters, in the side of the not holy side, there is the ultimate, the three shells, which is called the complete impure shell, complete impure energy of the impurity. And then we have the neutral impurity, the klipa, the shell that covers their godliness, but is also potentially good. So the sadness comes from this place, klipas noiga, but it doesn't come from the side of holiness. Because regarding the holy side, it says, it is written, strength and gladness are in his place. And we know, it says also that the divine presence dwells only when one is happy, only through happiness and joy. And also, joy is required for the study of the halacha. So joy is required everywhere. Now, regarding the sadness, if the sadness comes from spiritual things, if spiritual faults lead you to be sad, then this type of sadness comes from the good part of the noiga klipa, of the noiga shell, which, as we said, the neutral shell. But it still is not from the holiness. It still is from the shell, which the shell represents something that covers the holiness, covers the goodness. And indeed, says the Alter Rebbe here in parentheses, that the Arizal said that a person should always be happy, and even worries about sins only should have dedicated times for this. But that's what he says. V'lachein kosav Arizal she'afilu daigas ha'avonos eino re'uya ki'im b'shas avidui. The Arizal writes that even worry over one's sins is appropriate only during confession. V'loi b'shas ha'tfila v'samut Torah, not during the time when one prays or studies Torah. Shetzarich liyos b'simcha shemitzad ha'kedusha dafka. It is necessary to have it done. The tefillah and the Talmud Torah, prayer and study Torah is important to do with joy, which comes from the holy side. So therefore, the question is, if a person will be so critical of himself, it can lead him to sadness. Says the Alter Rebbe, nevertheless, this is necessary. Step number one, he says, this is necessary. And we'll soon see how Alter Rebbe says it will lead you into joy as well. It says, Afal Pikein, nevertheless, number one, you have to know that this is important. This is necessary. This is precisely the method of humbling the Sitra Achra. You have to humble the Sitra Achra, the evil inclination, the other side. You have to humble it through something of its own species and kind. So he says, meaning the Sitra Achra is the most effectively attacked by utilizing the good contained within it as a weapon against itself. Like I said, you fight fire with fire. Kamaimar Azal, as our sages tell us, Minei uvei ibel l'shadya beinaga. From the forest itself comes the handle for the axe, which fells the forest. You want to chop down a tree, you got to use a tree, meaning the handle of the axe, to chop down the tree. It says also in other places, encountered one of its own kind. So that's why Alter Rebbe says it is necessary to have this critical thinking, and even though it leads you temporarily into a sadness, then it is necessary, because that will help you to break out of it. And of this sadness resulting from contemplation of one's spiritual state, it says, Bechol etzev yiyeh moiser. In every sadness, there will be profit. And we learned this in the previous chapters. And here the Alter Rebbe explains, Vayisraini, what is the profit? Asimcha haba achar etzev kedelekama. It is the joy which follows the sadness, as will be explained later. Now, so that's step number one. Now here comes the Alter Rebbe and says, you know what? The truth of the matter, that if you think about it, what is the type of emotion that you're feeling? That is a positive thing, although be it a temporary thing, because really the right way to serve Hashem is with simcha and joy. But the occasional necessary sadness is really not considered sadness. And he's going to explain that there is a difference between sadness and bitterness, meaning brokenheartedness. What is the difference? He's going to say the sadness is something that you become sluggish, you become lazy, you want to go to bed. It is something which has no energy at all, depression. That is something you should not have. The bitterness, the brokenheartedness is something just the opposite. It is an emotion that is full with energy. It is emotion that really leads you to do only good things, to try to correct the situation. That's what Alter Rebbe says now. The truth of the matter is, ein leiv nishbar merirus hanefesh. Arichu kama oir Hashem, meir pnei Hashem, ve'islabshusa besitra achra nikroim b'shem atzvus klal b'loshen HaKodesh. He says, the state of being contrite of heart and bitter of soul, which is remorseful over one's remoteness from Hashem, and over the fact that one's soul is clothed in the Sitra Achra. He says this can by no means be described in the Holy Tongue, in Hebrew, as the term atzvus. Atzvus means sadness, but this cannot be, that emotion cannot be called atzvus. Why? Ki atzvus hi sheli by metumtum ke'even. The atzvus, the sadness, means that one's heart is as dull as a stone. Ve'ein chayes b'libay. There is no vitality in his heart. Aval merirus ve'leiv nishba, adarabah. But bitterness, merirus, and a broken heart, this is the opposite is true. Arei yesh chayes b'libay le'ispa'el u'le'ismarmeh. Very fact that one is moved to be embittered is itself a sign of life. That it bothers you. You want to change something. Except that this vitality derives from the holy attribute of severity, the gevuros. And it therefore expresses itself in bitterness. Whereas joy derives from the holy attribute of kindness, chasadim. Because the heart contains both these attributes of kindness and severity. Now, says the Alter Rebbe, what we do need to have this occasionally. Now, at times, one must arouse the holy attributes of severity, the gevuros, in order to temper, to sweeten the stern judgment, which in this context denotes the animal soul, nefesh ha'ba'amis, ve'yetzer hara, kasher chas v'shalom al ha'adam. It is the animal soul and the evil inclination whenever it dominates a man, God forbid. Ke'ein and dinim nimtokim ela b'sharoshem. For stern judgments, meaning restraints on one's spiritual well-being, can only be sweetened by means of their source. That's what we said earlier in this last chapter, that a person has to get his Yetzer Hara to be upset at this Yetzer Hara. V'lochein amor Hazal le'olam yagiz adam Yetzer HaTov. For this reason, our sages said that one should always incite the good inclination to anger against the evil inclination. V'hainu, when is this necessary? B'chol eis sheroye b'nafshoy shetzorich lekach. This is whenever a person finds it necessary for himself that he needs to do it. And again, we can't stress this enough, that this is not the norm. This is not the way a person should feel. We should always be besimcha, always serve Hashem with joy. This is only, the Alter Rebbe is giving us advice at occasional times that we need to break down on ourselves to break the evil inclination. So occasionally you need to do it. And here the Alter Rebbe gives us another piece of advice. And that is, he says, you know what? You know when would really be a good opportunity to use this crushing down the Yetzer Hara? This would be when a person is sad, depressed anyway. When a person is depressed, when a person is sad for whatever reason, couldn't pay the mortgage, has problems with the kids, whatever the reason is, use this opportunity and say that I'm now in this situation anyway. Let me think. How is my nefesh habahamis doing? How is my evil inclination? Who is in control over here? And that is an opportunity, because you're sad anyway, so you can take this sadness and use it in a positive way. That's what Alter Rebbe says now. However, the appropriate time for this anger of the divine soul, at the animal soul, meaning the time which is opportune and fitting for most people, this is when one is in any case depressed over mundane matters, or sometimes you're just sad, you're just down, you're just you have the blues without any reason, without any cause. Then says the Alter Rebbe, this is the opportunity, this is the opportune time. And this is the opportunity to become, to be among the masters of accounts that mentioned above, to engage in soul searching and spiritual stock taking. And to fulfill the previously mentioned teaching of our sages, that one should always incite his good inclination against the evil inclination, since both of these paths harness the attribute of severity, and that's how he will thus also be rid of the depression brought on by mundane manners. Why? Because when a person is, you have to be sad. So if you have a feeling of sadness and you're going to direct it, that feeling, and you're going to do something about it, you're going to have the feeling of sadness rather than just be blues. Try to think about it. Wait a second, I'm now sad. Let me think, how can I use it out? So when you use it out in a positive way, then you become active about it, and you start doing something about it. You become not just sad, you become bitter, and you fill yourself up with energy, and you say, I'm going to do something. So now, first of all, your sadness as now a proper path and a proper direction. It's not just sad of something you cannot do anything about anyway. It is something you're directing it to something good. And that will help you come out from the sadness altogether and to continue to do what we need to do every day. And that is Ivdu Hashem B'Simcha, serving Hashem with joy. So this is the end of today's shir. Thank you so much for joining. And feel free to share it. Make sure more Yidden, more people benefit from this special lessons from the Alter Rebbe, from the Tanya. Any questions?